The mess hall of the SEAL training base was louder than usual that afternoon. Dozens of young soldiers sat at long metal tables, laughing, arguing, and trading stories of the day's brutal exercises. Trays clattered, boots hit the floor, and voices bounced off the walls like waves hitting rocks. It felt like a storm of noise filling the entire room. But even in that storm, one table stood out more than the others. At this table sat a group of the most confident SEAL traineesmen and women who believed nothing could shake them. Among them was Mason, the loudest joker in the building, known for teasing others and making people laugh even when they were exhausted. Beside him sat Torres, the strongest of the group, and Kayla, who always laughed at every joke no matter how silly it was. They were in the middle of a loud argument about who had the worst drill instructor when the heavy doors of the hall slowly opened. At first, no one noticed. The noise was too big, too chaotic. But then someone at the far end of the room suddenly stopped talking. Their silence spread like a soft wave, moving from table to table, until the whole room grew strangely quiet. Every head turned toward the door. A single old man walked in. He looked completely out of place. His hair was white as winter snow, his steps slow but steady, and his face calm in a way that felt powerful without trying. He wore a simple red jacket, an old belt, and shoes that looked repaired many times. He didn't carry a cane, nor did he seem weak, but something about him felt ancient, like he came from another time. Mason blinked in confusion. "Who's that?" he asked quietly. Torres shrugged. "Maybe someone's grandpa?" Kayla whispered, "He looks different. Not normal different? Important different." The old man walked deeper into the hall, looking around like he had been here before, many, many years ago. His eyes scanned the tables, the ceiling, the floors, as if he remembered every detail from a past long forgotten. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He didn't seem bothered by the dozens of young soldiers staring at him. He simply walked. Some soldiers stood straight without realizing it. Some lowered their voices. A few even felt nervous and didn't know why. There was something in the old man's posture, something in his silence, that demanded respect without him asking for it. But Mason, being Mason, couldn't stay silent for long. The old man reached the middle of the hall and stopped, as if deciding where to sit. That was all the invitation Mason needed. He leaned back in his seat, grinning widely, shouted loud enough for the whole hall to hear. "Hey, old-timer, what rank were you? Or were you around before ranks were even invented?" The hall exploded with laughter. Some soldiers covered their mouths, others slapped the table, and a few choked on their food. Even Torres laughed, shaking his head. Mason loved moments like this, moments where he was the center of attention. But the old man didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He slowly turned his head and looked at Mason, and that look simple, quiet, steady made Mason feel something he had never felt before. Embarrassed. The old man's eyes held no anger, no insult, no shame. They held something far heavier: experience, pain, strength, and something else. Mason couldn't understand. The hall fell silent again as the old man stepped toward Mason's table. Each step echoed. Soldiers leaned forward without breathing when he reached the table, stopped in front of Mason. The young SEAL tried to keep his smile, but it shook slightly. He wanted to say something funny again, but for the first time in his life, the words refused to come. The old man looked down at him and said, "Nothing." Mason swallowed hard. Then the doors of the hall opened once more, this time with force. A high-ranking officer stepped inside. His uniform was neat, his medals shining, and his expression hard and serious. But the moment his eyes landed on the old man, everything changed. His face froze, his breath caught. Then, without hesitation, the officer straightened his posture and saluted deep, respectful. And full of fear and admiration, the entire hall stared in disbelief. Mason's mouth dropped open. Torres blinked rapidly. Kayla covered her mouth with both hands. The officer spoke with a voice trembling with respect. "Sir, we were not told you were arriving today." The old man nodded slowly, still looking at Mason. I didn't come for ceremony, he said in a calm voice that echoed through the hall. I came for lunch. His voice was soft, but it felt like thunder in the silence. It was the kind of voice that had once given orders that changed battles. The kind of voice that young soldiers would follow without question. The kind of voice that history would never forget. The officer stepped aside immediately. Of course, sir. Anything you need. The old man turned his gaze away from Mason and looked around the hall. I'll sit anywhere, he said. No special place. He walked toward an empty space at a table near the center. Soldiers moved out of the way without thinking, giving him room with quiet respect. Some stood, some saluted, others simply watched with wide eyes. Mason sat frozen, his earlier confidence gone completely. He whispered to Torres, What? What rank is he? Torres shook his head slowly. I don't know. But he's not just a veteran, Mason. He's someone big, Kayla added in a whisper. Someone very big. Mason felt cold inside, a feeling he had never experienced during training. He realized his joke might have been a terrible mistake. The old man sat down, lifted his fork, and began eating calmly. But the silence around him stayed heavy, thick, full of mystery. And as the young soldiers watched him, only one question filled their minds. Who is this man? And what has he done to earn such fear and respect? The mess hall remained quiet long after the old veteran sat down. Normally, by this time, the room would be loud again, filled with jokes, arguments, and the sound of trays being slammed around. But today was different. Today, something heavy hung in the air. Something none of the young SEALs could explain. Mason kept staring at the old man, trying to understand what he had done wrong. Usually his jokes made people laugh, even the strict instructors. But the moment he saw the officer salute the old veteran with such deep respect, Mason felt something inside him twist. It was the first time he wondered if he had crossed a line he didn't even know existed. Torres nudged him lightly. You okay, man? Mason shook his head slowly. I don't know who he is, but I think I messed up. Kayla leaned closer, lowering her voice. I think we all felt something when he walked in. Like he was. More than just a veteran. At the far end of the hall, two instructors whispered quietly. Their faces looked tense, their eyes never leaving the old man. Mason watched them. He had never seen those instructors look nervous, not even during inspection days. One of them, Instructor Hale, leaned toward the other. Are you sure that's him? He whispered. The other instructor nodded. It has to be. Nobody else carries that presence. Mason frowned. Presence? What did that even mean? The old veteran continued eating slowly, as if nothing around him mattered. He didn't look proud or angry or amused. He simply ate with calm dignity, like someone who had eaten in 1,000 halls like this before. But the soldiers around him were not calm. A trainee from another table. A thin recruit named Oliver whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. I heard stories about someone who trained the first generation of special units. Someone who worked in missions that were never recorded. His friend shook his head. That's just military legends. Ghost stories.
Oh.
Oliver swallowed. Maybe not. Their whispers traveled like wind through the room, growing bigger, louder, more dramatic. The old man's name was still unknown, but the mystery around him became thicker with every second. Mason tried to shake off the tension building inside him. He usually loved attention, loved being the loudest voice in the room, but right now, he wished he had stayed silent. Every moment felt like a spotlight shining on his earlier joke. Torres lowered his voice. Look, maybe you should just leave him alone today. Apologize when the right moment comes. Mason nodded weakly. I will. But the right moment didn't come quickly. The officer who had saluted the veteran stood nearby, silently guarding the area around him, as if he feared someone might disturb the old man. His face stayed tense, his hands behind his back, watching every movement in the hall. Finally, a brave trainee leaned forward and called softly to the officer. Sir, who is he? The officer didn't turn. Someone you show respect to. But what's his rank? The trainee insisted. The officer slowly turned his head, his eyes sharp. If he wanted you to know, he would have told you already. That answer only increased the fear and curiosity in the room. Mason stared at the old man again. There was something in the way he held his fork, something in the way he took each bite slowly, something in the way he didn't react to the whispers around him. It was as if nothing in this building could disturb him, like he had already seen worse, experienced worse, survived worse. Kayla spoke quietly. He doesn't seem bothered by anything. Torres nodded. Yeah, almost like he's used to being stared at, Mason whispered. Or maybe he's used to people fearing him. Kayla's eyes widened. What do you mean? Mason swallowed. When he looked at me earlier, it felt like he could see everything. Like he knew every stupid thing I'd ever done. Torres didn't laugh at that. Maybe he's someone who's seen real battles. The kind we only read about. The whispers grew louder around the room. The whispers grew louder around the room. Some soldiers guessed he was a former commander of a secret unit. Some thought he might be a legendary war hero. Some even said he might have medals that were never displayed, but nobody knew his name. Finally, the officer stepped closer to the veteran and spoke in a low voice. Sir, do you need anything else? The old man shook his head. No, just let them eat. They are young. They must laugh and fight. It is their time, not mine. His voice was calm, but there was a distant sadness in it, like he carried memories heavier than any metal. Mason felt a chill run down his spine. The officer nodded and returned to his place. But another instructor finally gathered the courage to approach the officer. Is it really him? He whispered urgently. The officer glanced at the old man, then leaned in closer. Yes, it's him. Instructor Hale's face paled. Does command know he's here? They were informed, the officer whispered, but they did not expect him to come today. Mason struggled to hear the rest of their quiet conversation, but one word reached him clearly, a name. Softly whispered, barely audible, the name made Instructor Hale straighten instantly, his eyes wide with shock. Mason tried to hear it again, his heart racing, but the officers had already walked away. The whisper hung in the air for a moment, then faded into silence. Torres leaned closer. Did you hear the name? Mason shook his head. No. But whatever it was, it scared them. Kayla's voice trembled slightly. Whoever he is, he's no ordinary veteran. The old man finally finished his food and placed his fork down with quiet grace. The entire hall watched him, waiting for his next move. He slowly looked around the room, studying each face with calm eyes. Then those eyes returned to Mason. Mason's heart pounded. The old man stood up. The hall held its breath. He took one step toward Mason's table, then another dot. Then he stopped right in front of him. Mason felt the entire room freeze. The old man spoke softly, but his words felt heavy enough to silence oceans. You asked me a question, he said. Perhaps I will answer it. Mason swallowed hard, unable to speak. The old veteran continued, but not here. Not yet. Turned away and walked slowly toward the exit. Before leaving, said one final sentence that filled the hall with fear and curiosity. Some ranks are not written. They are earned. And with that, he stepped out, leaving behind a room full of stunned soldiers and a mystery that had only grown deeper. The mess hall remained tense long after the old veteran left, as if the air itself held on to his presence. Mason sat frozen in his seat, replaying every second of their strange encounter. Torres kept glancing at the door, half expecting the old man to step back inside. Kayla tapped her fingers nervously on the table, unsure what to say. Everyone felt the same heavy question pressing on their minds. Who was he? And why did his final words feel like a warning rather than a simple comment? No one spoke, because no one understood the truth yet. Instructor Hale was the first to break the silence. He marched toward the officer who had saluted the veteran, his voice shaking with frustration and fear. The officer held up a hand before Hale could speak, signaling him to stay quiet. That reaction alone made several trainees sit up straighter. It was rare to see an instructor silenced so easily. Hale leaned in closer, whispering urgently, though everyone nearby strained to hear. Even Mason found himself listening more carefully than he ever had in training. Something dangerous lived inside this mystery, something much older than any of them expected. Kayla leaned closer to Mason, her voice barely a whisper. She asked whether he had any idea what the whispered name had been, but Mason shook his head immediately. He wished he had heard it. He wished he had caught even a fragment, because the fear in the instructor's eyes told him that this name carried more weight than any rank they had been taught. Torres crossed his arms, scanning the hall as though searching for clues hidden among the shadows. Everything about the veteran's arrival felt wrong, out of place, and strangely deliberate. It was almost like he was testing them. Outside the mess hall, the old veteran walked slowly along the corridor, tracing the walls with his eyes, as if revisiting memories long buried. His steps echoed softly, steady and calm. Two junior officers watched from a distance, unsure whether to approach or keep back. The veteran paused near a display of framed photographs showing past SEAL commanders. He gazed at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved on without a word, leaving the officers frozen in confusion. Nothing about his presence felt casual. Every motion felt intentional, as though he had returned for a reason none of them understood. Back inside, tension grew stronger. Mason rubbed his hands against his knees, trying to steady himself. He had never cared about ranks or formalities before, but now he felt the weight of something much bigger pressing down on him. Kayla whispered that she had seen the veteran's eyes when he spoke those final words. And they were not the eyes of a man visiting casually. They were the eyes of someone carrying stories too dangerous to speak aloud. Torres suggested that maybe the veteran had returned because of some old unfinished business. Mason silently hoped that business did not involve him directly. Instructor Hale finally returned to the center of the hall, his face pale and jaw tight. He ordered everyone to remain seated until further instructions, something he rarely did. The trainees obeyed without question. Hal exchanged glances with the other instructors before speaking in a low but firm voice. He said that the veteran was a guest of the highest respect, and that no one was to approach him unless invited. Mason felt his stomach sink even further. It was clear now that his earlier joke held more danger than he had imagined. Even Kayla's face turned completely serious. Torres leaned toward Mason and told him he might need to apologize soon. But Mason wasn't sure that was enough. Something told him the old veteran already knew everything he needed to know. A strange chill crept along Mason's spine as he remembered the veteran's calm eyes studying him without judgment. It felt as if the man had looked through him rather than at him. Kayla commented that she felt the same unsettling sensation, as if the veteran had seen every fear she tried to hide. None of them could shake the feeling that the veteran's visit was far from ordinary. Outside, the veteran stepped into the courtyard, the wind brushing gently against his jacket. He paused near a memorial stone engraved with names of fallen soldiers. For a long moment, he stared at the list, his expression unreadable but undeniably heavy. A junior officer approached cautiously, asking if he needed guidance or assistance. The veteran simply shook his head. He placed his hand on the stone as though greeting old friends, then whispered a few quiet words the officer could not hear. The officer felt a shiver run down his back, sensing that the veteran's connection to those names was deeper than he could imagine. Back in the hall, the whispers grew louder as more trainees attempted to piece together the story behind the mysterious visitor. Some believed he was a founder of an early covert unit. Others speculated he had led missions still classified today. A few even wondered if he had once commanded operations that shaped entire wars. Mason felt all these theories adding pressure to his chest. If even half were true, then his foolish joke might have offended someone whose legacy stretched far beyond the base. He clenched his fists, realizing he needed to understand what kind of man he had spoken to so carelessly. Torres suggested they should try asking the instructors directly. But Hale's expression warned them to stay silent. Kayla wondered aloud whether the veteran would return or disappear again without explanation. Mason hoped for another chance to see him, fearing the unanswered question would haunt him. None of them realized that the veteran's return had already started a chain of events that would change their lives forever, pulling them into a story far older and far darker than anything they had ever faced. In their future ahead, In their future ahead, the sun was beginning to set outside the SEAL base, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The mess hall had finally returned to its routine noise, but the mood inside remained different. Every trainee spoke quietly, every movement felt cautious, and every mind still replayed the moment the old veteran looked Mason in the eye and promised to answer later. Mason couldn't focus on anything else. He pushed his untouched tray away and kept staring at the door, waiting for the man to return. Torres tried to calm him, saying maybe the veteran had already left the base, but Mason didn't believe that. Something inside him said the meeting wasn't over yet. Instructor Hale stepped into the hall again. But instead of his usual strict expression, he looked thoughtful. He walked to the center of the room, raised his hand, and signaled for silence. "Listen carefully," he said. "The man who visited today is not just a veteran. He is someone who shaped the path we walk on today." He didn't reveal more, but his voice carried a weight everyone felt. Mason's heart beat faster. He wanted answers, even if they scared him. Suddenly, the hall doors opened again, and the old veteran walked in. He moved slowly but confidently, as though he had been waiting for the right moment. The room fell silent as he made his way to Mason's table. Torres sat up straighter. Kayla held her breath. Mason felt his palms sweat, unsure of what would come next. The veteran stopped directly in front of him. "Mason," he said softly, surprising everyone by knowing his name. "You asked about my rank?" Mason nodded, unable to speak. The veteran continued, "I will give you an answer. But first, you must understand something." He pulled out a small, worn patch from his jacket pocket. It looked older than any modern unit patch Mason had seen. The edges were frayed, the colors faded, but the symbol on it was unmistakable. "A trident crossed with a dagger and a single star above it," Torres whispered. "I've never seen that before." Kayla leaned closer. "It looks ancient," as the veteran held it between two fingers. "This was given to a very small group," he said. "A group that operated when missions were too dangerous, too secret, or too impossible. We didn't carry ranks the way others did. We carried responsibilities." Mason felt a chill sweep across his skin. "So what were you?" he finally whispered. The veteran looked into his eyes, and for a moment, Mason saw a lifetime of battles reflected in them: pain, sacrifice, and victories no one would ever read about. "I was the one they called," the veteran said softly, "when no one else could be sent." The hall remained still. "But a title does not matter," he added, "because rank fades. History changes. Uniforms change. Only character stays." Mason swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for my joke." The veteran placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "A man's future should not be judged by one foolish moment," he said, "but by what he learns from it." The young SEAL felt something shift inside him: humility, respect, and a new sense of responsibility. The veteran stepped back, turned toward the exit, and said one final line that echoed through every heart in the hall. "Remember this. The greatest warriors are not known for their rank, but for the weight they carried in silence." He walked out into the sunset and disappeared beyond the gates, leaving behind a story that would be told for generations. The end. The end.